Kirsten is here.
I'm kind of here. Hi.
Hi, Kirsten. So good to see you.
You too, Mary. I've missed you.
Well, I just am busy at this other church, and it just takes me away.
I know.
Great time, and everything is going. We have a book club. We got a Bible study.
So busy.
It's great.
It's great, but it's not right. Hi, Mitch.
Kristen, how are you?
Good.
So you got my email, I see.
I did, thank you.
Did you find the rest of the stuff you must have found the rest on the website, right?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I listened to session 1. I loved it.
He's a neat guy.
Yeah. I would definitely be taking notes in his class.
Well, fortunately, he gives them to you.
Yes. Hi, Penny.
Hi, Penny.
Hello. Ray is here too.
Hi, Ray.
Ray. Oh, there's the dog. Okay.
The dog.
Not complete until the dog shows up.
The minute the computer comes on, I don't know how she knows. It doesn't matter. She's got to be there.
Is Emily working from your house? I think I saw her the other day.
She was here until a week ago Saturday. Teleworking, but now she's teleworking she's back in DC. She actually is living in snow for a while.
Went back just in time for the ice storm.
Yeah, we had nothing and she got the snow. But they had wind just like we did. We spent the morning putting all the deck furniture that was under canvas cover and ended up in the yard.
Yeah.
Ours blew over. I just left it over because the wind was still going. And I thought, what's the point in setting it up? It'll just blow over again.
It was quite a day. It was cold. I was out doing Martin Luther King Jr. celebrations in Norwich. And we walk every year, which is lovely.
Oh.
And you just go from in front of City Hall up to the church, and then there's a worship service. But this year, they had a special, and it was the unveiling of one of the murals that had gotten painted on the garage next to the harbor. And so we were out there waiting for the unveiling. They had this enormous tarp over the side of the garage, and everybody was there. I mean, all the politicians. We had Courtney and everybody showed up. Blumenthal only sent a letter, but it was so cold. Oh, the wind.
Down by the water. I feel your pain. That's why they have some things called exposure suits. Orange things that you get to put on, and it's like going back to the womb.
Yeah, it was a really nice ceremony, and and so I was glad for all that. But wow, it was cold.
Yeah, we need to get you an orange exposure suit.
Then I would show, wouldn't I?
Yeah.
I'll make it stand out in the crowd.
Of course, all of the reporters were there, and it'll be in the newspaper tomorrow. They're taking pictures of it, and
okay, we'll have to catch it in the newspaper then.
It's much better than catching it out there in the cold.
Yeah, I've been there, done that, and we're both retired. We can't do that anymore. I know exactly what you're talking about.
It reminded me of watching a submarine get christened. It was the same kind of drama, cold. Hi, Diane.
Hello, how are you?
Just fine.
Hi, Diane.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey, Diane.
So So a couple of big folks have told me they can't make it tonight. Janet and Donita couldn't be here. So, although I don't see David, so
He's off the last one to join.
I think Carol will be here. She's going to have to get.
Oh, yeah, actually, Carol, too.
Yeah.
Carol was here last time.
Yeah, she's just going to have to get over the loss of UConn women because it was sad.
Oh.
The game just finished.
Oh.
It was awful.
How bad was it?
Well, we were down by 20 at one time. We may have lost by 15.
Wow.
But it was bad from beginning to end.
Who did play?
Oregon, but another of our top players couldn't play because of COVID. So 4 of our top players were not playing.
Oh, jeez.
It was tough. It was hard to watch. So Carol will be here.
Okay, so I did rearrange the schedule a little bit. Here's David. He got longer to come from Rochester. Hey, David.
He's looking the wrong way.
There he is. Hello, David.
Still don't have any audio.
You're muted. These really are like seances. You know. David, are you there? Can you hear me? Here's Carol.
There's Carol.
There. Now can you hear me?
Yep. I was just saying how much the Zoom meetings are like seances.
Hi, Carol.
Hello, do I? I do. I have the audio.
Rough game, huh? Carol. Rough game.
Looks like almost everybody's here tonight.
Hey,
yep, we got everybody. I just mentioned Danita couldn't join us, and neither can Janet. So I think we've got the quorum now. So I did send out a revised schedule. I decided to delay the lecture on law and law codes and all that kind of stuff till after we've heard a little bit more from Professor Cohen and have a better introduction. Otherwise, it's kind of jumping off the deep end. And before I go any further, I want to introduce, we have a new participant, a new student. In my upper right-hand corner, this is like Hollywood Squares.
Tic-tac-toe.
Helen has the Paul-in square.
Oh, I do?
Yeah.
I can have some snappy comebacks if you'd like.
So in my upper right-hand square, I've had Kirsten Olmstead, who joins us, who's a St. Luke affiliate. So just go around the room, so to speak. Helen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Well, I'm Helen. I had been doing some lay ministry at Newick Church, but Newick Church has now decided to close. So now I'm back to being a parishioner full-time. Now I've been attending St. Mark, St. Mark, but I belong to the church down the street at Lee Memorial. So I'm all over the place.
Dale?
Yes. Of course, I'm a parishioner of St. Mark. And I'm enjoying this series tremendously. And I loved our session on Saturday. It is just brain-moggling. I mean, so much to learn, so much. I just hope I'm around long enough to learn a little more. I just love these sessions.
Yeah, just by way of background, what we're doing on Saturday at St. Mark is we're doing, it's another teacher, actually it was a guy who used to be Mary's teacher at Yale, Luke Timothy Johnson, and it's a series of lectures actually on the evolution of the Bible in terms of the different translations, and then we're getting into the Reformation and printing and all that kind of stuff and how that changed things. So we do that on Saturday mornings at St. Mark. Right. And so Kirsten, you want to say a few words about yourself?
Well, I was always intimidated by Mitch's workshops. I'd never go to the Sunday lifelong learning because it was always intimidating to me. And also because I'm a teacher and I'm in the classroom and I just, one more course. But I don't know, I heard about this and then I listened to the first session and I was blown away. So I'm excited about it. And I'm excited to be with all of you.
Okay. So I'm assuming the rest of the St. Lucians know Kirsten?
Lucians.
Yes, we do.
I don't, what do you call somebody from St. Luke? St. Lucian or?
Now
we do.
Okay. So today, actually, we're going to have Professor Cohen, and he's going to be talking about sort of the grousing, grumbling, complaining passages from Exodus and Numbers. We are going to hear about the golden calf and some other disagreements that Moses and the Israelites had out in the desert. One of the things he will mention in passing, he does have a little bit more detail in your notes, but one of the things he mentions is he talks about the golden calf as a reference to the sin of Jeroboam. Now, what he's talking about there, now keep in mind that there's always some other story lurking behind the text. And the golden calf, some scholars think it actually is an attack. When you read the story, it's actually an attack or criticism on King Jeroboam, who was the first king of the northern kingdom. Remember that when kingdoms, the united monarchy was basically David and Solomon. Then that broke up after Solomon died. And so Jeroboam was the first king of the northern kingdom. And so he set up two golden calves up in Dan and I forgot the other place. So the point is that when you read the golden calf story, there may be hidden in there or behind that, there may be a subtext about something going on in later years and that's sort of when they were assembling these stories and sort of emphasizing what they wanted to. So being the scribes. So anyways, that when he glides over the sin of Jeroboam, that's what he's talking about. And your notes do have the references. The sin of Jeroboam is in First Kings. And if you look in your notes of your Jewish study Bible for the passages in Exodus 31, where we talk about the golden calf, they do refer to that too, and they'll explain that too in your notes. So just, that's sort of the quick go by on there. And the other thing is we get the ever popular talking donkey is in this section in Numbers. So I'm sure everybody will want to hear about that. So I did send out a revised schedule, and so any questions?
We don't have a transcript for tonight, right?
No, you just have the notes. So it starts on page 31. Right.
No, I didn't see any. That's why I just want to make sure I didn't miss them.
Right. Nope.
We don't always.
No, the only attachment to this email was the revised schedule.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
Do you recommend reading the notes beforehand, or?
You can follow along while he's talking.
Okay.
It doesn't hurt to read anything beforehand, but I mean,
yeah.
But everybody's busy, so it's okay. And then on the other professor, that's Professor Hayes. This is for Kirsten. What I have is actually the transcripts of her lectures. Now they're on the website, but I will usually extract those and send them out a couple days before, so you can follow along. But that is actually a transcript of the lecture that she's giving. So okay. Without further ado, I will share my screen. We'll share the sound. Go here.
You gonna mute us, Mitch? Or should
Good
we
idea.
mute ourselves?
Looks like everybody's.
I'm not muted.
I took care of it. Shrink that.
Okay, so today is a session that I inserted into the syllabus and required me to jiggle around a whole bunch of things. But I thought this stuff was too interesting and too important just to slide over it. So we have today a session which I called alliteratively, ooh, that's bad, Dissidents in the Desert. So here we have a bunch of stories, and I've given you on the syllabus and on the handout the list of the stories. This is just about the entire inventory. I might have skipped one or two sentence little things that float by in the biblical narrative, but certainly all the big stories of Israelites in the desert causing trouble, raising a ruckus, or we might say grumbling. Right, grumbling. That's what's going on for today. So just make sure we know where we are in the narrative before we look at these stories. So we have the Israelites leave Egypt, right? The Song of the Sea, Exodus chapter 15. We have them immediately go off into the desert, Exodus 16. That's our first grumbling story right there. Exodus 16, Exodus 17, right? We'll come back to that, the first grumbling story. Moses, we have nothing to eat. Moses, we're thirsty. There's no water. Moses, it was much nicer in Egypt. Right, that's chapter 16 and chapter, paraphrasing. Chapter 16 and chapter 17. Already we're in, right. Then this is, after that's gotten out of the way, we resume our grand narrative of marching through the desert, and we come to the foot of Mount Sinai, sometimes called Mount Horeb, right? And there we have the dramatic scene of the Israelites receiving the 10 commandments, or the 10 words, the Decalogue, right? That occurs in chapter 19, sets you up for that. Chapter 20 is the revelation at Mount Sinai. That is followed immediately by the covenant code. Remember covenant code? What's the covenant code? Best of civil laws. All right, I'll take it, right? It seems to be a self-contained collection of laws that appears right after the 10 Commandments are over, right? And before the narrative resumes, we have there a piece of laws, which some of which we would call criminal law, some of which we would call civil law, a little bit in there we would call it ritual law, right? And this is the self-contained code of law, which has all kinds of connections with Near Eastern law. Okay, that's called the covenant code. Exodus chapters, 21 to 23, is that right? Give or take a chapter in either direction. Okay, then the narrative resumes, and we go look at the handout. At this point, we start to get a little confused. Where exactly is Moses? Is Moses up on top of Mount Sinai with God, communing with God, or is Moses down below with Egypt? We have repeated instructions from God to Moses. Moses, go up. Moses, go down. Right. It's really very confusing. And the narrative now is getting a little bumpy. I'm not sure where we are anymore in the narrative. So Moses is somewhere either on top of Mount Sinai communing with God, or Moses is down below giving instructions to the Israelites. So in 24, verses 12 through 18, God gives instructions to Moses to go up to Mount Sinai. Not clear if that's the same time as he went up earlier, or that's yet another time. Okay, I'm a little confused, but that's where Moses is. Chapter 25 to 31 is a long insertion in which God instructs Moses to build the tabernacle, which is a portable tent shrine. We'll talk about that more when we discuss P next week. A portable tent shrine, which is going to travel with the Israelites in the wilderness. Instructions how to build it, all the official vestments of the priests, of the high priests, instructions how to put the thing together. That's what we have in this insertion 25:31. Second person masculine verb. You shall this. You shall make this. You shall make that. You shall make this. You shall make that. You being apparently Moses. Where is Moses at the time when he gets these instructions of these long chapters? presumably he's up on Mount Sinai with God. That's where we left him. So presumably this insertion is an insertion of somebody wants you to make clear that the instructions to build the tabernacle come directly from God to Moses while Moses is on the top of Mount Sinai. Even though the text does not say what I just said. But that seems, I'm tempted to say, surely that's implied by the way the chapters are arranged. So we get to the last verse of chapter 31. God gives Moses the 2 tablets of testimony, which seem to be another name for the Decalogue, and everybody knows what they look like, right? You've all seen pictures of the 10 Commandments, right? So the 2 tablets, and Moses is ready to come down. That's when all of a sudden, chapter 32, we have the story of the golden calf, about which more anon. The golden calf story, in which the Israelites once again take grumbling to a new level, right? In which they rebel, actually flat out rebellion against God. This is not just grumbling anymore. This is, we're out of here, right? So that's the golden calf story. Moses descends from Mount Sinai now, carrying with him the genuine tablets written by the hand of God, or the finger of God. He sees the Israelites cavorting and doing all sorts of improper things, perhaps resembling a undergraduate drinking party, right? The Israelites are all rolling around in improper, well, whatever. You understand, right? So Moses is angry and throws the tablets onto the ground, smashing them. And then the story proceeds after everybody calms down. Moses has to write the new set of tablets, which is what happens in the story. We'll come back to that. What happens after that, chapter 34? Also in chapter 35, now Moses builds the tabernacle. Now I'm really confused. I lost track of where we were. And then the narrator, for some reason, repeats almost verbatim all those instructions that Moses had gotten. You shall make this, you shall make that. Now it says, and Moses made this, and Moses made that. And it repeats everything verbatim. If Moses had asked me for editorial advice, I would have suggested to him, Moses, you could probably skimp on these chapters because you already told everybody in detail before. Now all you have to do is say, and Moses did as God instructed him. That's all. But no one asked my opinion. So what can I do? So there are chapter 35 to 40, which Moses now builds the tabernacle, or perhaps with Bezalel, this artisan craftsman working with him, build it, right? And then the book of Exodus comes to an end. And now I'm thoroughly confused where I am in the storyline, and it gets worse because the book of Leviticus has no storyline at all, and the book of Numbers, we don't get a storyline, we get bits and pieces of a story. And one tempted to say is the storyline is lost. There is no storyline. The storyline more or less resumes in the book of Joshua. I get episodes here in the book of Numbers. Virtually no episodes in Leviticus. I can think of 2 episodes, but virtually nothing happens in the book of Leviticus. Almost nothing happens. In the book of Numbers, we get little bits and pieces. And the kind of story that the book of Numbers likes most of all are grumbling stories. There's one story after another in the book of Numbers, how the Israelites grumble, rebel, revolt, turn back, want to turn back, turn their back on Moses, etc., etc. That seems to be a favorite story. So if you're a little unclear where we are in the storyline, the answer is you're right. It's a little unclear where we are in the storyline. So that's the background where we are, and among those stories that we find, these self-contained episodes are grumbling rebellion stories. That's what we're talking about today. Okay, let's look at these stories. So, first big point. The experience of the Israelites in the wilderness. In the Hebrew Bible, there is a tradition that this is honeymoon. God and Israel have just sealed the knot. They signed a covenant, which is like a marriage contract, and the marriage metaphor does emerge among the prophets. So this is when they're in full bloom of youth and love, as they wander off to their honeymoon suite, right there in the desert, to consummate their relationship. That's one way to look at it. And I gave you 2 famous passages in the book of Jeremiah where he does that. Where Jeremiah says, people of Israel, come with me again back to the wilderness the way it once was. But of course, the tradition that we have in the Torah is not that one. What do you mean come back to the wilderness? It was terrible. Every few chapters, more Israelites are getting killed for rebelling and grumbling. Why should I want to go back to the wilderness? So Jeremiah, you either have a different version of the Torah in your book, or it's very selective reading. But this is a different tradition. The tradition that we have is that the time of the Israelites wandering in the wilderness is a time of constant, almost uninterrupted trouble, tension, rebellion, grumbling. In the Jeremianic tradition, I don't know where that comes from, but it doesn't come from our book of Numbers, I'll tell you that. So we have these grumbling stories. What happens in the grumbling stories? 3 basic patterns. A, Moses, we have no food. We have no water. The food tastes terrible. We had such good food back in Egypt, it was wonderful. That's pattern A. Right. Pattern B. Moses, who the hell are you to tell me what to do? Who put you in charge? Who made you, and worse yet, who made Aaron in charge? Right, Aaron is the high priest. So who the hell are you, Moses and Aaron, that you're bossing us around, telling us what to do? That's pattern B. Or pattern C, we don't have so much grumbling as the Israelites run off and do something terrible, something, quote, sinful. That's the Baal Peor story in Numbers 25, or the golden calf story, which we'll talk about in a moment, and or they lose trust in God. In the spy story, they hear the report from the spies, and all of them say, it's over, we're doomed. These are three basic patterns, and then what happens? So we have this grumbling, this rebellion, this rejection of God, and then we have a common outcome. God blows up. God loses his temper. God loses his cool. Remember, this is an anthropopathic God. This is a God with anthropopathic human feelings, human emotions, right? God gets happy, God gets sad, God gets angry, God can cry, God can laugh, right? God has human emotions, so God blows up. Typically what happens too, there's a kind of plague or a mysterious fire or something happens and wipes out at least some or all of the malefactors who are involved in this. And then finally God solves the problem. We're thirsty? Okay, here's some water. We're hungry? Fine, here's some food. Just leave me alone. I added that part. Which God, solves the problem. We're hungry? Okay, here's food. When God gets angry in these stories, the typical reaction is God says to Moses, Moses, stand aside, I'm going to nuke them. Drop one bomb, take them all out, and I'll start over again with you. And Moses says in reply, no, God, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, that's bad, don't do that. And Moses has a favorite argument. What will the Egyptians say? In other words, God, it looks terrible. It really looks bad. You will not be able to put this down, right? You can't do that. Terrible for your reputation. And God typically says, well, all right. Okay then, I won't wipe them all out. But instead, I'm going to punish them. Right. This is a typical pattern in these stories. And this motif, by the way, that God, you can't do what you're planning to do because if you do, you'll ruin your reputation. You'll be shamed in front of other nations when they hear about what you've done. That argument, we'll see, recurs regularly in the Psalms and occurs occasionally in the prophets. Some ancient Israelites thought this was a very powerful argument, that God, for his own reputation, cannot punish the Israelites in the way that he wants to. Because if he does, he'll be seen as a failure. A very interesting idea. Well, that's part of Moses' argument. God, you can't do it. You promised the ancestors. That's part of it also. You promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we got a deal. But of course, God can say in reply, no, you got a deal, but you promised to be good boys and girls, and look how you're doing. Look what you're doing. So this deal thing works both ways. I'm coming to that. Many of these stories contain the miraculous. I'm not sure how to explain it, why these miracles seem to cluster in these stories, but they do. So the very, very, very first one, Exodus 16, 17, right? Hey, we have no water. We have no food. So God brings down the manna, this very mysterious bread from heaven. In Exodus chapter 17, with a parallel in the book of Numbers. Or we're thirsty. Okay, Moses, take your staff and hit the rock, and the water will come out of the rock. Mysterious plagues, mysterious pillars of fire, this ever mysterious bronze serpent to put an end to this plague of serpents. I don't know what's going on there, but it sure is intriguing. Earth swallows up Datan and Aviram, everybody's favorite moment, right? Where the earth opens its mouth, literally, that's what it says. The earth opens her mouth and swallows them up, like we would say an earthquake. Except it was a targeted earthquake. And the sprouting of the staffs, that all the tribal chieftains put their staffs in this tabernacle and come back the next day and they've all sprouted. Sorry, Aaron's staff has sprouted, excuse me. So the miraculous, it seems to be a regular motif in these stories, again making clear who's right and who's wrong, right? Who's behaved correctly, who's behaved incorrectly, who's legit, who's authentic, who's not. That seems to be a prominent motif in these stories. Last but not least, many of these stories are complex assemblages of material. They're not straightforward, simple stories. Almost all of these are complicated combinations of things, if you trust modern Bible scholars. So, the manna story, I didn't put that in the handout, but the manna story in Exodus 17 is a combination of two stories. There's quail. We're hungry, nothing to eat. Okay, how do you feed them? Either God sends manna, this mysterious food from heaven, or quail mysteriously show up and the Israelites eat them. And then God, of course, smites them and kills them because he can't deal with them. Okay, that's a combination of things. Plus, Exodus 17 throws in Sabbath law. Really complicated story what's going on in Exodus 17. Then we have doublets. Exodus 17 and Numbers 20. Kugel talks about this. We seem to have the same story twice. God told Moses, they're hungry, they're thirsty. Okay, Moses, take your staff and strike the rock. Moses strikes rock. Water emerges. Children of Israel drink water. Everyone is happy. Right, that's the story. Except the second time around, Moses says, talk to the rock. But Moses forgot, having remembered the earlier chapter, right? And Moses strikes the rock. And God says, I didn't tell you to do that. And he blows up at Moses. So, okay, anyway, it seems to be the same, two versions of the same story. Everybody's favorite example, the rebellion of Korah in the book of Numbers. So Korah is a Levite. So it seems to have a Levite's gripes against Aaron. I'll come back to that in a few minutes. Levites gripes against Aaron. We also have Datan and Aviram. Who are they? I don't know. They're from the tribe of Reuben. They have other gripes. And the gripes of Datan and Aviram and their 250 followers and the gripes of Korah are blended together into an almost seamless story, except that if you read it very carefully, it's very clear the earth swallows up Datan and Aviram, and Korah seems to die in a mysterious fire. But modern Bible scholars are very good at detecting seams in the narrative. Last, the spy story. Who's the hero of the spy story? Who is the one spy who comes back and says, don't listen to them. We can trust in the Lord and we can conquer them. Have no fear. Forward. Who says that? The other spies will say, no, we're doomed, we're doomed, we're doomed. And this spy says, no, trust in the Lord and we will triumph. Who is that? So it's either Caleb, or in Hebrew, Kalev, Caleb, or some later narrator didn't like that because after all, it's Joshua who's going to lead the Israelites into the land of Israel, so he's stuck in Joshua. So it's Caleb and Joshua. Again, very bumpy. So I don't know how to explain this either, why these stories are not simple stories. These are complicated combinations of things that are put together in such a way that we, ever skillful modern Bible scholars, can then take them apart. Okay, those are the big themes. Exciting stuff. So now the big question. And I thought Kugel would talk about this big question, but he doesn't, or if he does, I missed it completely. Why does the Torah have such stories? This is not just one isolated story here. We've got a bunch of stories, and some of these stories are real stories, episodes, not just 2 or 3 lines, a whole chapter's worth of material, and sometimes more. Why does the Torah have such stories? What's the meaning of such stories? Again, I'm not asking whether stories are true or not. For the 99th time, that's the wrong question to ask. The question to ask is, what do the stories mean? So here are my guesses. I'm happy to hear your suggestions, or when you read them, you'll get your own ideas to understand what's the point, and why do we have these stories. So it emphasizes divine power. Here we see that motif of the Old Testament God of justice. You know, bam, bam, bam. You know, shooting with 6 shooters, or with dropping an atom bomb. You know, the angry God of the Old Testament, as Christians would say. Okay, yeah, we see that. So we learn not to mess around with this God. This God is a powerful God. Certainly true. This God, does not brook rebellion easily or lightly. True. This God can get angry. True. But I would say no less important as a motif in these stories is God's mercy. The same God who blows up at his people and wants to kill them is also the God who can forgive them. And that, I think, is no less a striking motif. Especially in the big stories, the golden calf story and the spy story. These are the quintessential moments where Moses is at his best. Where Moses is not just a leader, but Moses has the prophetic role of intercessor. He intercedes on behalf of the people of Israel with God. He turns to God and says, God, you can't do that. You can't kill them off. You have to have mercy. And indeed, these scenes in Exodus and Numbers become, at least in later rabbinic readers, these become the quintessential phraseology which we use all to this day in the rabbinic prayer book when we're trying to invoke divine mercy and forgiveness. We're quoting Moses. So what's remembered of the story, at least in later rabbinic reading, is the power of divine mercy. No matter how far gone you might be, there is still the potential for divine mercy. Now, I see that motif in these stories also. How to play that off against the powerful, just, vindictive God? Well, okay, we have a tension here. These are both aspects of the divine. It would be a mistake to focus on the one and to ignore the other. Then we come back to this mysterious covenant thing that Rachel had reminded us about. The covenant, remember, is the link between God and Israel. But this is not a natural link. I use the phrase I like to use. It's not natural, it's constructed. Right? It doesn't just come with the territory. It's not like just a tree grows out of the ground and there it is. No, it's a negotiated relationship, which both parties enter into this relationship, each one having chosen the other. And that's how the text depicts it. So what we see in these stories is there's a risk of this link being broken. There's a risk that one party can say, I'm out of here. Enough. Or from the Israelite point of view, the risk is we fear there's a risk that God will rip up the covenant and then will be abandoned. And indeed, in later later biblical literature, and then in later Jewish literature, we indeed have such conscious reflection, especially in and around a disaster which has happened, in which we say, God, how could you allow this to have happened? How could this have befallen us? Have you abandoned us? Have you rejected us? Are we not your people? This will become a very powerful motif in later reflection, precisely because there's always the fear in a covenantal relationship, is this really permanent? So if I read this correctly, what these stories might be saying is, you Israelites got to behave yourselves. God can reject his people. He doesn't, because he's merciful. But he could. And you have to behave yourself. You have to be mindful of what God wants. So the chosen people motif does not mean that people of Israel are immune to divine punishment. It means the opposite. Chosen people motif means that the Israelites get special attention from God for their infractions. Well, that's the best I can do with this motif. If you have bright ideas of how you would understand what we're supposed to take away from these numerous stories, I'd be happy to hear it. In any case, what's remarkable is that the stories do not remember the Israelites marching through the Red Sea and then marching straight through to the land of Canaan, head held high, full of confidence and trust in the Lord. The opposite is the story. It's just completely the opposite. We'll come back to the truth question, namely, did the Israelites, were there 603,500 adult Israelite males, not to mention women, children, hangers-on, and cattle and such, did they march their way across the desert in Sinai and then come across the Jordan and conquer the city of Jericho? Do we believe that as a story, as history? Answer, I'm not going to answer that now, but we'll come back to that in a couple weeks. Okay, we'll discuss that. Right now, I'm just trying to understand what the stories mean, right? What truths, in the eyes of the storyteller, the stories are trying to impart. Now, as far as place names, I don't know where the chicken or the egg is on this one. Do we have a list of place names, and then later Israelites invented all kinds of stories so as to justify and explain the place names? Or are the place names cleverly invented as after these stories are up to sort of tell you what the stories represent or what the stories signify? I don't know. But many of these stories are, in fact, associated with place names that are apparently bear some import related to the story. Last point, some of these stories are more clearly focused on specific points. So, why Moses did not enter the land of Canaan? That's the answer. How come Moses didn't make it? He came to the border of the land of Canaan and God said, okay, it's enough. Now it's time to die. Why did Moses make it? Yes, Rachel.
He struck the rock.
He struck the rock instead of speaking to it. Instead of speaking to it. Now you might say in reply, gee, that's not so terrible, is it? I mean, all right. So he forgot. He remembered the chapter from Exodus instead of the chapter from Numbers, and he got confused. God, is that reason enough? All right, don't ask me. Ask what it says. So I was explaining this mystery, why Moses led them out of Egypt, but could not quite make it into the promised land. Why did the Israelites wander in the desert for 40 years? So why did it take 40 years? Because God wanted all the original people who exited from Egypt to die. Why did they want them all to die? 40 years, a generation to go by, so that their children would inherit the land of Israel, not them. Why not? Because God's angry at them. Why? They grumbled a lot. Yeah, exactly. God was sick and tired of all their grumbling, especially the spy story. When the spies come back with bad news, these cities are, you won't believe, and these people are like giants, and the walls are thick like this, and there's not a chance in hell we'll be able to conquer them. Right. And the Israelites go off in their tents and all start crying and say, oh, it's all over, we're done for, let's go back to Egypt, we'll never succeed. And God said, that's it, I've had enough. Okay, that's it, you're not going to conquer the land then. That's the way you feel, then fine, don't do it. You die in the desert, your children will inherit it. That's the story. But wandering around 40 years in the desert, and there's not a kiosk in sight. How do they support themselves? Answer, well, the story explains over and over again where they got water from, where they got food. No, that's part of the story. It's explaining this mystery. How you have 603,500 adult Israelite males with women, children, and attendants, hangers-on, and flocks, and somehow they don't all starve to death or drop dead of thirst. So the stories explain that. So I understand that's part of the function of the story. Okay. Let's talk about the golden calf story, which is, as I said, by far the most important of these stories. Important in the sense of the impact it has on later readers. What's going on in the golden calf story? So you recall Moses is up on the top of Mount Sinai. Moses is up for 40 days and 40 nights. Although I'm not sure that's this period of 40 days and 40 nights or some other period. It's confusing. But the chronology is mixed up. Anyway, he's up there on Mount Sinai, on the top of Mount Sinai. And it says that we get turned to chapter 31, chapter 32. And the Israelites say, I don't know what happened to Moses, but he seems not to be coming back. So what should we do? And some bright person says, I know, let's make a golden calf. And everybody says, great idea. Aaron, you make us a golden calf. Aaron, brother of Moses. Right, you would think Aaron would do better. But Aaron says, okay. Right, I'm paraphrasing here again, right? They make a golden calf and they start then dancing lewdly, is what's suggested in the text. And presumably that leads to where the usual results of such activity, right, around the golden calf. And until, of course, Moses comes down, picks the next moment to come down the next day, 1 day late. One day, that's all it took. Moses is a day late, that's how the rabbis do the chronology. He spent one more day, the Israelites miscounted, 40 days and 40 nights. They couldn't wait anymore. So Moses comes down the next day and his sidekick Joshua says, Moses, I think there's noise in the camp. And Moses says, Charlton Heston, this is not the sound. Well, whatever, anyway. So you should watch the movie, right? He comes down, he sees what's going on, he sees the golden calf, he sees the people corrupt, or the morals corrupted, right? And he hurls the 10 Commandments onto the ground, which means what, class? It's the same thing as saying, see your covenant? I've torn it up. It's over. It's completely null and void. Then we have a scene, a very complicated series of scenes where the malefactors get killed off. Who comes to Moses' aid? The Levites come to Moses' aid to act as a sort of police force, right, to come kill off all the malefactors. And then there's something mysterious going on. Then the story gets a little fuzzy. But it ends with, the climax of that story is Moses importunes God. God wants to kill them all, start over again. Moses importunes God. There's a very mysterious and very touching scene of Moses with a revelation of God, God's revealing part of his self. Very mysterious chapter, right, to Moses. Moses prays, God forgives, and then Moses gets more instructions from God, which may or may not be a different version of the 10 Commandments. And Moses goes back up to the mountain. That's the story of the golden calf. So, what's going on in this story? So the story as we have it is a polemic against the shrines built by Jeroboam. Who is Jeroboam? Don't tell me Jeroboam is a large bottle of wine. Giggle, that's a joke, class. But the Jeroboam is a large bottle of wine, right? If you don't know what I mean, just look it up, Google it, Jeroboam, you'll see. So who is Jeroboam? Or in Hebrew, Yeroboam. Who is Jeroboam? Write that down in the IDs. They should know Jeroboam. Okay, right. Jeroboam is the king who broke away after the death of Solomon. The kingdom splits, if you recall. Go back to your biblical timeline. Very helpful timeline prepared by B. Right? Go back to the timeline. Solomon dies. We'll talk about this in a couple of weeks. We get to the narrative. We'll get to that point. He dies, and then there's a secession of the northern tribes from the southern tribes, and we have this split. The united monarchy becomes a divided monarchy. Ephraim and Manasseh in the north, and Judah in the south. A couple more tribes here, a couple more tribes there, but the main tribes are Ephraim and Manasseh in the north, and the tribe of Judah in the south. Jeroboam is that no good rebel, Johnny Reb, turncoat, right, who leads the rebellion of the northern tribes against the south. Is Jeroboam a good guy, class? No. I'm just referring to what it says in the perspective of the Book of Kings, right? The real story is far more complicated, right? Book of Kings presents it as simply They have a grievance, it's true, but the grievance does not justify what they did. So the northern kingdom begins as an act of rebellion, and Jeroboam is the rebel. Now Jeroboam, knowing that the Israelites revere and respect the temple that had been built by David and Solomon, I'm not sure I believe that either, but that's what it says in the book of Kings. So Jeroboam says, gee, I got to make sure they don't go on pilgrimage to the temple, then they'll rebel against me. They'll go back to the house of David. I need to find a way to cement their loyalty to the northern kingdom and not to the south. So what bright idea did he have? I know, I'll build a shrine. Special shrines are my borders, one in the southern border, one in my northern border, and the Israelites who want to go to a temple, well, they'll go right here. They don't have to go to my enemies down south, they can go right here. So he builds one in Bethel, he builds one in Dan, Bethel in the south, Dan in the north. And what do you think he puts into his shrines? What does he put into his shrines? Matt, what does he put into his shrines?
Golden calf.
Golden calf. Now, in the eyes of the author of the Book of Kings, that plus his rebellion against Solomon, but that act is the great sin of Jeroboam. Because it's no longer just a rebellion against the house of Judah, it's a rebellion against God. With the act of building the golden calf, it's understood to be idolatry, right? Worship of false gods via images. Now, it's very likely that Jeroboam was not worshiping false gods with this golden calf. He thought he was worshiping the God who took the Israelites out of Egypt. In fact, that's the phrase that's used, the identical phrase, in the book of Kings and the book of Exodus. When the Israelites build the golden calf, they say, either this is or these are your God or gods who took you out to the land of Egypt. They're not worshiping some other god, they're worshiping that God, except they're doing so through images. The narrator, both in the book of Exodus and the book of Kings, forgets this subtle but extremely important distinction and sees the worship of any image as ipso facto the worship of a god other than the true God. So when they say, these are your gods, or this is your God who took you out of the land of Egypt, from the point of view of the narrator, that is false. Because no God who's a golden calf took anybody out of anywhere. This is an act of rebellion against God. So many modern Bible scholars have suggested that the story in the golden calf in the book of Exodus, lurking beneath it, was once upon a time an original story authenticating the golden calf. Look, Jeroboam says, we Israelites have been building golden calves for a long time. Why, it goes back to the Israelites in the desert. This is a perfectly licit way to worship the God who took us out of the land of Egypt. And that story is then turned upside down on its head, where it is now taken to be an act of rebellion. Okay, I'm not sure I believe what I just said, but that's what modern Bible scholars argue. And indeed, it is a strange story. But here's the bottom line. Surely we're meant to understand that the golden calf in the desert is as illegitimate as the golden calves erected by Jeroboam, and in fact, the one clearly shows that both are sinful acts of rebellion, inauthentic, illegitimate. Stay away. Look at the story in the book of Kings. You haven't done it yet, but you will in notes in the JSB. The story as we have it is a polemic against Aaron and in favor of the Levites. Aaron builds the golden calf. Bad, bad. The Levites helped Moses restore order. Good, good. Now what's the relationship between Aaron and the Levites? Well, it's complicated. Right, they're all from the same tribe of Levi. Right? Remember the sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, the third one. So the third son, Levi. So if Aaron is from the house of Levi, if you are descendant from Aaron, then you wind up being a priest or a Cohen. Moab. If you are not from the house of Aaron, but you're from the other lines in the tribe of Levi, you turn out to be a Levite. To be very blunt, ladies and gentlemen, what is a Levite? Levite is a second-class priest. A bottle washer. The priest gets all the glory out in front, and the Levite just gets his hands dirty and carrying stuff and cleaning up. How that came about is a very interesting question, which is I cannot possibly begin to discuss now, basically because I don't know the answer, and also because the theories on this point are all over the place. There's something odd. So anyway, Aaron, in this story, this story seems to be told by a supporter of Levites. Levites support Moses. Aaron builds the golden calf. This is the opposite to the Korah story, where in the Korah story, Korah is a Levite rebelling against Aaron, right? And that story very clearly says Korah, Aaron. So that's the opposite, the mirror image story. So these stories testify to inner struggles within the priestly strata, within the hieratic strata, right? The group that services the Lord in the holy sites. There's fight. There's an out fight going on. Okay, the story raises an interesting question of where the divine presence is. This is going to be rather complicated, and I'll come back to this when I discuss P. The important point here is that according to the story as we have it, Moses is so fed up with the people, so angry at them, that he takes the tabernacle, or the tent of meeting, moves it outside of the camp, moves it from the inside the camp to outside the camp. In other words, God's presence should be inside the camp with the people. That's P. According to P, the Israelites will build a tabernacle, a portable tent shrine, and it's located smack dab in the middle of the camp. And therefore, as punishment, the divine presence is removed from inside to outside. But there is another voice in the Hebrew Bible, in the Torah, which says outside is the appropriate place for it. Because you don't want the divine presence to be inside the camp, where people live, die, have sex, have babies, have skin eruptions, and all kinds of yucky things happen. You want God out there where it's safer. Two perspectives. This story sees the perspective that God's presence belongs in the camp, and outside the camp is a sign of the diminishment, the diminution of divine contact with his people. And that's what happens in this story. Moses takes the tent, moves it outside the border. There's a very important note there in the JSB. I'll explain what I just said. Last but not least, golden calf story will figure prominently in later Jewish-Christian debate. When Moses smashes the tablets, is this another way of saying that the old covenant is gone? If you are a Christian reader, you will look at the golden calf story and you will say, see, this proves that the covenant of the law is broken. This is not the true covenant that God wants. And if you are a Jewish reader, you'll have to say, yeah, that's true, but he put it back together again, right? Didn't we? We got a second set of covenant, the second tablets, and they're just as good. Okay, that in summary will summarize much Jewish-Christian debate, in which the golden calf story will loom large in Jewish-Christian debate. Horned Moses, radiant Moses. Okay, that's a note in the JSB, right? The famous story of Michelangelo with the Moses and the horns. Look at the note in the JSB to explain that. Okay, now I only have like 1 minute left to discuss the Balaam story. The Balaam story is here only by association. Numbers 25 is a grumbling story, right? The story of the Israelites go a-whoring after the daughters of the Midianites, or is it the Moabites? I forget for a second. Moab. Moabites. And they go a-whoring both literally and metaphorically. Literally, they go a-whoring with the daughters of the Moabites. And metaphorically, because that means also the turning against God. So the rebellion against God. So the story as we have it is juxtaposed to this mysterious seer, magic man, seer, prophet, Balaam, or Balaam in Hebrew, or Balaam in English. Famous for its talking donkey. So there are numerous complicated traditions about this, but later on in chapter 31, we understand that Balaam is the one who came up with this devious plan to get the Israelites to go a-whoring and sinning with Baal Peor and the daughters of Moab, so as to ignite the wrath of their God against them. Isn't this clever? Right? You can't beat them, we'll get their own God to destroy them, is Balaam's plan. That's what's implied in chapter 31. The Balaam story otherwise stands by itself as an extraordinarily intriguing little piece. It's the only non-Israelite prophet in the entire Hebrew Bible. Famous for its story of the talking donkey, which is just an amazing little piece, where most scholars agree this is meant to be funny. It's meant to show him a buffoon story. It's meant to be comical. It's meant to lampoon this figure of Balaam. And yet, the story is full of these extraordinary prophetic prophecies or songs about Israel and God, some of which are still recited today in Jewish liturgy, notably Ma Tovu Olecha Yaakov, how beautiful are your tents, O Jacob, is a quote from Balaam in this passage. And all scholars observe that Balaam seems to have been a well-known magic man, seer in the ancient Near East, because we have attestations of Balaam outside the Hebrew Bible. To put it together, it's an extraordinarily intriguing little piece, but my time really is up. So, thank you everyone. I'll see you, Monday is a day off. Enjoy your vacation. I'll see you a week from today.
Okay. Let's see, over to. So I think you can all unmute. I was just looking here.
Mitch, I need to leave because Barkley has to go outside.
Oh,
So-
okay. I don't want to stand in the way of that.
Okay, goodbye. Good night.
Good night.
Hi, Dale.
Good night, Dale.
I guess one of the larger questions he asked, which is interesting, it's always interested me about these stories, is really goes back to why, when you look at our stories about, for instance, the founders, founding fathers and founding mothers, George Washington and Jefferson and Adams and all that crowd, and Lincoln, we by and large elevate them. They're occasionally are revisionists and sometimes show they have field play, but by and large, they are elevated to the point of being semi-deified. So it's interesting, why do the Israelites have this whole bunch of stories talking about arguably their founding generation really acting by and large like a bunch of jerks? I mean, why would you tell stories about like that about your framers? Is a question I've had.
I usually think of it as just an example that human nature hasn't really changed.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's the way it's the recording of the way people were, instead of coming up with something that was, a fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
No perfect people, and maybe it's the style the way they wrote then too. Sometimes, what happened.
Well, and Moses isn't perfect, but I think it shows, the stories show who God is. It's not glorifying the people or their leaders. It's saying, this is the God we have. And yes, he can get angry. But also, he can be convinced when we pray to give us another chance. Basically, he cares for us. He is merciful to us. He keeps his promises to us, despite all our feelings. So it's not to say that the people themselves are noble. It's they've got a good God.
It's almost drawing a contrast. It's emphasizing God's mercy at the expense of the Israelites.
Mm-hmm.
But those are the stories that we have so much trouble when we're trying to figure out what God is like. You know, it's so hard to even believe that God changed God's mind. We want him to be consistent. I mean, how can you trust someone who's always changing their mind?
And yet, one of my favorite words in the Bible is God's steadfast love.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's confusing.
I do think our idea of God evolved over time. And he's a pretty, I think the professor used the word anthropomorphic. I mean, they're viewing God in human terms as having human qualities. And over time, we've come to have a purified version of God. And then we have Jesus, who's right in it with us.
And, you know, he hinted at the idea of mercy as for God. I mean, this goes over scores of years. I mean, it wasn't just an enlightenment that, oh, all of a sudden, oh, this is God and we're going to follow him. I mean, it took a long, long time. And yet God was consistently merciful, but God has his limitations. You know, if you go a little too far, I'm going to pull you back in, but there's still that mercy there throughout time. So he's saying, I want you to go this way, you get off track, well, I'll try to pull you back. But if you keep going that way, I'm going to let you go.
So you're saying, Dave, that it tells us the free will that people have.
Yep.
Yeah, you have a choice.
Well, people have a choice. That's one of the things that we were given, because even in accepting, as Christians, when we get into accepting our faith, accepting God only through Jesus, it's always a choice. And life, I told my kids, life is about the choices you make. You know, but that's a gift that's been given to us. You know, do we always use it to, you know, what God thinks is the right way? Not always.
No, we all make bad choices. And the other thing is that God doesn't abandon us when we do.
Right.
And
No, he leaves you in the desert for 40 years.
There you got it.
Well, see, on the other side of that, I like to think of God as having, you know, he kind of starts with these Israelites, and he's got to tell them that I am your Lord, your God. And, you know, I kind of equate that to when we have babies and you know, they're getting into toddlers and we're trying to teach them not to touch the stove. Our instruction is very black and white. This is good, that's bad. And then as our kids grow, our parenting style changes, because you cannot discipline a 12-year-old the way you discipline a 2-year-old. And I kind of equate that with the way God treats the Israelites.
I did want to share with you, I was going to pick up in the middle of the story here, but if you go to, if you go later, it's in Numbers 22, and I'm going to pick up on the story about the Balaam here, and it says he was hanging around the Moabites, which was upsetting God. So I'll start with that, and it says, when he arose in the morning, Balaam saddled his ass and departed with the Moabite dignitaries. But God was incensed at his going, so an angel of the Lord placed himself in his way as an adversary. He was riding on his she-ass and his two servants alongside, when the ass caught sight of the angel of the Lord standing in the way, with his drawn sword in his hand. The ass swerved from the road and went into the fields, and Balaam beat the ass to turn her back onto the road. The angel of the Lord then stationed himself in a lane between the vineyards, with a fence on either side. The ass, seeing the angel of the Lord, pressed himself against the wall and squeezed Balaam's foot against the wall, so he beat him again. Once more, the angel of the Lord moved forward and stationed himself on a spot so narrow there was no room to swerve left or right. When the ass now saw the angel of the Lord, she lay down under Balaam, and Balaam was furious and beat the ass with his stick. Then the Lord opened the ass's mouth, and she said to Balaam, what have I done to you that you have beaten me these 3 times? Balaam said to the ass, you have made a mockery of me. If I had a sword, I'd kill you. The ass said to Balaam, look, I am the ass you've been riding along on all this day. Have I been in the habit of doing thus to you? And he answered, no. Then the Lord uncovered Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, and his drawn sword in his hand, and thereupon he bowed right down to the ground. The angel of the Lord said to him, why have you beaten your ass these 3 times? It is I who came as an adversary, for the errand is obnoxious to me. And when the ass saw me, she shied away because of me those 3 times. If she had not shied away from me, you are the one I should have killed while sparing her. Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, I erred because I did not know you were standing in my way. If you still disapprove, I will turn back. And then it goes on from there. So that is the talking donkey. Which is kind of funny.
Yeah. Sometimes we're just as blind.
What?
Sometimes we are just as blind.
Yeah.
As Balaam.
Yeah, it just sort of pops up and then they move on to other. It's one of those things about Numbers that he mentioned, that Numbers is really episodic. You'll have something happen, then something happens, and sometimes there's no real connection between one or the other, in subsequent stories. So they just sort of, which is one of the things that makes it confusing. So, okay.
Yeah.
David?
No.
Oh, I thought you said something. Okay. All right. So next week we'll have Professor Cohen again talking about the priestly code, and he'll talk about that, and then we'll have Professor Hayes following that. So if anything comes up, please you can get my email or my text, and feel free to ask me any questions. And again, this should be posted on the church website in a few days, when I'll give the flash drive to Lee so you can see it again. Okay.
Thank you, Mitch.
You're welcome.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Good night.
All right.
Right.